I never thought this would happen to me. It feels like I'm living someone else's life, watching it unfold from the outside. Maybe it's the way life changes slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, until one day, you wake up and realize that everything is different. That's how it happened with Emily. Our marriage, once full of love, slowly shifted into something unrecognizable. I was absorbed in my work, I admit it. I became an accountant, and that came with its own set of demands. The numbers, the reports, the deadlines, they all consumed my time. I'd be at the office late into the evening, or I'd be working from home, buried in spreadsheets, trying to make sense of the mess of numbers. It didn't help that I was good at it, and the more successful I became, the more I threw myself into my work. But there was always Emily at home, waiting. At first, she was patient with it. I thought she understood. She always had her interior design projects to keep her busy. But after a while, I could see it in her eyes. This emptiness, like she was fading away before my eyes. She stopped complaining, but I could tell. And then, one night, she came home late after a walk, and that's when everything changed. I was at the office again, working late on a project I could have wrapped up hours ago. I knew I was neglecting her. I could feel the strain in our relationship, but I told myself it wasn't that bad. She'd always been independent, always busy with her own work. So, when she said she was going out for a walk, I didn't think much of it. She said she needed fresh air. I thought she was just blowing off steam, but she had her reasons. When she came home, I could tell something was off. She was distant, but there was something else, something guarded, like she had a secret she was hiding. At first, I tried to ignore it, but that night, she told me about running into Tom. Tom, my old friend from university. He and I had been close back in the day. I hadn't seen him in years, but Emily had always stayed in touch with him. They'd become friends, but she was always so supportive of me when it came to my old friendships. Now, she was telling me that they'd been meeting up to catch up. That was the first red flag, but I brushed it off. Tom was just a friend, right? But there was something in her voice, something I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, I noticed her getting more and more withdrawn, more distant. I still spent long hours at the office, not paying much attention to the little things. I didn't ask too many questions. And then I found out. One evening, Emily told me she was meeting Tom for a coffee. She seemed a little nervous, but I didn't think much of it at first. I was wrapped up in some numbers for a presentation, trying to meet yet another deadline. But later that night, as she was walking in the door, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen. I couldn't help myself. I saw a message from Tom, something about looking forward to seeing her again. I stood there, frozen, reading the message over and over again. Looking forward to seeing you again. It hit me like a punch in the stomach. The reality of it settled in like a slow-moving wave. She wasn't just meeting him for coffee. They were seeing each other. I confronted her that night. She tried to explain, but the words felt hollow. She said it was nothing, that it was just friendly. But I could see the guilt in her eyes. She wasn't fooling anyone. And when I asked her if there was more, she couldn't answer. Not immediately, at least. John, it's not what you think, she said, her voice shaky. I was lonely. You were never home. Tom he listened to me. He understood. Understood what? I snapped. What about me, Emily? What about us? You think I don't understand? You think I wanted this? She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at me, her face a mixture of regret and something else. Was it relief? Was she glad I finally knew? In that moment, I felt my heart break, not just for what she had done, but for what we had become. We weren't a marriage anymore. We were two people who had drifted so far apart that we couldn't even recognize each other. And she'd found someone else. Someone who could give her the attention I no longer had time to offer. That was the turning point. I tried to make it work, tried to talk to her, but it felt like talking to a stranger. She was already gone. I had lost her, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late. And Tom, he wasn't just a friend anymore. He was a threat. He had taken my wife from me, and I wasn't going to let that slide. What came next would be my revenge. But first, I needed to figure out just how deep this betrayal went and how far I was willing to go to make her understand the cost of what she had done. I should have seen it coming, shouldn't I? But maybe I was too blind, too wrapped up in my own world to notice the signs. The small things. The way Emily started pulling away, the distance in her gaze when she looked at me, and how we rarely spent evenings together anymore. She was always busy, and so was I, but deep down, I knew something was off. At first, I chalked it up to the routine, the monotony of everyday life catching up to us. It happens, right? You get lost in the grind of work, and before you know it, your relationship starts to feel like a series of obligatory exchanges rather than something full of life. But this felt different. The first real crack in the facade came when I found the text message. I wasn't snooping, not really. It was an accident, or maybe I was just subconsciously looking for something to confirm the gut feeling I had. It was one of Emily's messages to Tom. The casual, innocent tone didn't fool me for a second. Had a great time last night. Can't wait for next time, it read. I stood there, staring at the screen, trying to digest it. My heart pounded in my chest. So, this wasn't just in my head. She was having an affair. I felt a rush of anger and betrayal, but I didn't confront her right away. No, I needed more proof. I needed to know for sure. So, I started paying closer attention to the little things. Her phone, her whereabouts, her demeanor. I watched her more closely, and the more I did, the more I saw things that didn't add up. She was always vague when I asked her about Tom. If I brought him up, she would change the subject, avoiding my eyes. But then one day, I saw them together, on the street, talking. It was nothing extraordinary at first, just a casual conversation, but there was something in their body language that caught my attention. The way they leaned in when they spoke, the soft smiles exchanged, the looks that lingered just a little too long. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew in that moment that her feelings for Tom went far beyond friendship. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage at her, but I didn't. I stood there, silently watching, my mind racing. How could she do this to me? To us? How long had this been going on? That evening, I decided it was time. No more pretending. No more walking around this painful, unspoken truth. I confronted her. I needed to hear it from her, to have her admit what I already knew. Emily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, what's going on between you and Tom? She froze. Her eyes darted away from mine, and for a brief moment, I could see the panic. She wasn't prepared for this. Not yet. I don't know what you mean, she said, stammering slightly, but I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way her breath caught in her throat. Don't lie to me. I know about the texts. I saw you two earlier. What's going on? Her face went pale. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. She stood there, silent, and then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. I'm sorry, John. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. I didn't know how to tell you. The words hit me like a slap. It was one thing to suspect it, but hearing her admit it, it was another kind of pain. The betrayal felt like it was ripping me apart from the inside. But as much as it hurt, I couldn't let myself crumble. Not yet. Not when I still had a plan. I want to understand, I said, my voice cold, controlled. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, and then finally said, a few months. I'm so sorry, John. I didn't know what else to do. Her apologies didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. But instead of giving in to the anger, instead of exploding with rage like I wanted to, I simply nodded. I need time to think, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And when I figure it out, we'll talk again. That night, as I lay in bed, all I could think about was how my world had been turned upside down. The woman I had trusted with everything, the woman I had built my life with, had betrayed me. But what hit me even harder was the realization that she wasn't the only one in this equation. Tom, my old friend, had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But there was something else. As much as I hated what Emily had done, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let it slide without consequences. And I knew exactly where to start. Kate, Tom's wife. Kate was a woman who, in many ways, was just like Emily. She was lonely, neglected by a husband who was always too busy with work. I had seen it in her eyes whenever we'd crossed paths, the same emptiness I saw in Emily's before she met Tom. Kate was more than just a potential target for revenge. She was someone who needed attention, someone who could be manipulated. And in a twisted way, I would use that to my advantage. I began to visit their house under the guise of helping Tom with some business matters. He was always caught up in meetings or work, so I took the opportunity to offer a little support to Kate. At first, it was nothing more than casual conversations, but I could tell she was struggling. She was tired, emotionally drained, and looking for someone to talk to. I gave her that. I listened to her problems, let her vent about Tom's neglect. Slowly, she started trusting me, relying on me. And with every conversation, every moment of shared vulnerability, I could feel the distance between her and Tom grow. Kate began to lean on me more. She started seeking me out, confiding in me. And just like that, a bond began to form between us. A bond that, over time, became more than just emotional. She started looking at me differently, and I began to see her as more than just Tom's wife. She was my weapon. I had taken the first step in my revenge, and now I would make sure it would go further. I had started this out with a single goal in mind, revenge, but somewhere along the way, something shifted. I couldn't say I was falling for Kate. No, that wasn't it. But I couldn't deny the power I felt when I had her attention, when I was the one who made her feel valued, appreciated. Things Tom never bothered with. The thrill of knowing that I was getting under Tom's skin by building something with his wife was enough. But as the days went by, I began to see things in Kate that I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a pawn in my plan. She was real. She had feelings, desires, fears, and she was completely unaware that I was using her to hurt her husband. It started slowly. At first, it was innocent. Just me and Kate meeting up for coffee, taking walks in the park, grabbing dinner after work. We had these deep conversations, talking about our childhoods, our regrets, our hopes. I found out that Kate had always felt overlooked by Tom. She talked about how he would always be caught up with work, even when they were together, and how she longed for someone who would truly listen to her. I, of course, was more than willing to fill that void. I was attentive, making her feel seen and heard in a way Tom never did. And she responded to that. I made sure to compliment her, to admire her intellect, her beauty. I could see the change in her. At first, she was a little hesitant, unsure of her own worth. But with every compliment, every kind word, she began to glow. It was intoxicating to watch. She became someone who wasn't just Tom's wife. She was someone who was mine to shape, to mold, to manipulate. We started meeting more frequently. She would text me in the middle of the day, asking how I was doing, letting me know that she was thinking about me. It was always just small things, but they meant something to her. I knew that much. And as much as she tried to convince herself that this was just a friendship, I could see the way she looked at me, longing, searching for something more. She needed this. The physical part of our relationship didn't come right away. I wanted to be patient. I didn't want to rush it. I knew that Kate, despite her frustrations with Tom, was still loyal to her marriage, still clinging to the hope that things would get better between them. But every time we spent time together, the line between what was innocent and what was something else blurred more and more. I could see the attraction building in her, the way she leaned in when we spoke, how her breath caught when I touched her arm lightly. One evening, after a quiet dinner, we went for a walk along the river. It was the kind of night where the air was cool and the stars were just visible, and everything felt suspended, like time itself had slowed down. We stopped near the edge, looking at the water, when Kate turned to face me. She was nervous, I could tell. Her hands were trembling slightly as she spoke. "John, I don't know what this is. I never expected this," she said softly, her voice shaky. I could hear the doubt in her words, but I also saw the longing in her eyes. "You don't have to figure it out right now. I said, my voice calm, steady. All I know is that you deserve to be treated well, Kate. You deserve to feel special. And I see that in you. I see everything that Tom misses. She looked down, her gaze dropping to the ground, before meeting my eyes again. I feel like I'm finally being seen. That was when I kissed her. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate, just enough to make her feel wanted, desired in a way that Tom hadn't given her in years. She kissed me back, and that was the moment I knew this wasn't just some fleeting emotional affair. It had become physical, and it would remain that way until I was ready for the next step in my revenge. From that point on, things changed. We continued meeting secretly, and while the thrill of the affair wasn't lost on me, it was more than just about the act itself. It was about control power. I had worked my way into Kate's life so seamlessly that she didn't even realize I was controlling the narrative. Every time we were together, I made sure she felt loved, wanted, and understood. Things that Tom had stopped offering her long ago. Kate never suspected anything. She thought she was just having an affair with a man who cared about her. She had no idea that the man she was with was the same one who had been betrayed by her husband, the one who was manipulating her every step of the way to get to Tom. As time went on, I began to plant subtle seeds of doubt in Kate's mind about her marriage. I knew how important it was to manipulate the situation carefully. I didn't rush things. I waited for the right moments. When she'd talk about Tom's neglect, I would offer my sympathy, but also gently nudge her thoughts in the direction I wanted them to go. You deserve someone who will give you the attention you need, I would say. Someone who doesn't make you feel invisible. It worked. She began to question her marriage more and more. She saw Tom as the problem, not realizing that I had become her problem too. But I wasn't done yet. The next step in my plan was to make sure the truth about Kate and me came to light, on my terms. I couldn't just let things keep simmering in the background. I had to make sure the damage was done in a way that would make Tom feel the full weight of the betrayal. That's when I started spreading rumors. It was subtle at first, small, almost innocuous comments to mutual friends and acquaintances. It's strange, don't you think, how John and Kate are spending so much time together? I'd say. I've noticed they've been talking more lately. Almost like they're close. I made sure to plant the idea in the right people's minds. It was a slow burn, but it was working. By the time everything came crashing down, the whispers would already be there. The suspicion would already have taken root. And Tom, he'd have no idea what was coming for him. The game was on. The weeks passed in a blur, but with each day, I grew more certain of my control. Kate was more emotionally reliant on me than ever. Every moment I spent with her, every conversation, every kind gesture, it was all part of the plan. But somewhere in the midst of it, I found that I was beginning to feel something for her. It wasn't love. No, it was something far more dangerous. It was power. And with power, you can make anyone believe anything. Kate, though, she wasn't blind to what was happening. She was starting to realize just how much I cared for her. And that's what made her vulnerable. Tom had become so absorbed in his work, so consumed by his own ambitions, that he had stopped seeing her. He was always busy, always distracted, leaving Kate to handle everything on her own. The neglect was obvious, but even more so now that she had someone like me in her life. Someone who listened to her, someone who saw her. She began to depend on me, not just emotionally, but in every way. She didn't see it at first, but I could tell. She was falling for me, even though she would never admit it. And I wasn't exactly opposed to it. After all, if I was going to destroy Tom, I needed to be the one to fill the void in Kate's life. The more she relied on me, the more I could control the situation. I wasn't just her confidant anymore. I was becoming her whole world. But it wasn't just about her. It was about Tom, too. I wasn't satisfied with simply sleeping with his wife. No, I needed more. I needed to weave myself into his life, get deeper into his world, until he had no idea how to escape from it. I started visiting their house more often. I told Tom that I had some business matters to discuss. His company had been struggling lately, and I knew enough to offer advice. He didn't hesitate to invite me over. Tom always welcomed me with open arms, thinking I was just being a good friend. It was easy to play the part. I helped him with some minor things, made small talk about work, and kept my distance from anything that might seem suspicious. But I wasn't just there for the business talk. I was there to continue building my relationship with Kate, to become an even more integral part of their life. I started joining them for family gatherings. It was a strange kind of intimacy, being in their home, sharing meals, laughing with them as if I were part of the family. I watched Tom and Kate interact, and I could see how distant they had become. He was always on his phone, always distracted by work, while Kate was left to deal with everything on her own. And every time I was there, I made sure Kate felt seen, heard. I made sure she knew that I appreciated her. In those small moments, the lines between friends and enemies blurred even further. It was during one of these gatherings that I started to push things a little further. Kate and I had been spending more time alone, and the tension between us was undeniable. We were both playing a dangerous game, but it was getting harder to separate what was real from what was just part of the revenge. One night, after a dinner at their house, I stayed behind to help Kate clean up. Tom had left to take a phone call in his office, and I knew that Kate was feeling the weight of the loneliness she had been carrying for so long. It was then, in the quiet of their house, that we shared a moment. One of those tender, fragile moments where the world seemed to stop, and it was just the two of us. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told me everything. She was torn between her loyalty to Tom and the undeniable connection we had. I pulled her close, not rushing, not forcing anything. We stood there for a moment, wrapped in the comfort of the silence. "You deserve so much more, Kate," I whispered, my voice steady, sure. "You deserve someone who appreciates you, someone who sees you." She didn't pull away. She didn't argue. She just nodded. Her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. I could see it now, the way she was beginning to doubt her marriage. And it was only a matter of time before she would make the decision to leave Tom. But I wasn't done yet. No, not by a long shot. I needed more. I needed Tom to feel what I had felt when Emily betrayed me. I needed to break him. As Kate and I continued to grow closer, I took every opportunity to gather more information about Tom. I knew that the more I understood about his weaknesses, the easier it would be to tear him down. I found out about his recent business struggles, how his company was on the verge of financial ruin, and his mounting debts. It was a treasure trove of information that I knew would be useful when the time came. But it wasn't just his business I was interested in. I started digging into his personal life, finding out all the little secrets that Tom had worked so hard to hide. His image, his reputation, everything he held dear, was about to come crashing down. I wasn't just going to destroy his marriage. I was going to destroy everything he had built. The next move came at one of Tom and Kate's dinner parties. I had been waiting for the right moment, and this was it. Tom was in a good mood, and his guard was down. As we sat at the table, chatting with mutual friends, I casually mentioned how well Kate and I had been getting along. I dropped it in the middle of a conversation, as if it were no big deal. Kate and I were just talking the other day about how we've been spending so much time together lately. "It's been really nice," I said with a smile, making sure my words lingered just long enough for Tom to process them. I watched his face as he absorbed what I had said. His brow furrowed slightly, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He didn't say anything, at least, not immediately, but I could tell he was processing the information. The seed of suspicion had been planted. It was only a matter of time before it grew. It all came down to this, an event that had been building for months. The party that Tom and Kate had been planning, the one everyone had been looking forward to, would be the perfect stage for everything to come crashing down. I'd carefully set the pieces into place, and now, I just had to wait for the moment when everything would unravel. The night started off like any other, with laughter, music, and the usual small talk. Tom was in his element, the confident businessman who was always the life of the party. He was oblivious, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. Kate, on the other hand, seemed different. She was distracted, her usual bright demeanor replaced with a subtle unease that I couldn't ignore. I knew she was feeling the guilt, but I also knew she had no way out now. I had invited a few of our mutual friends, some who were completely unaware of the tension between the two of us, and some who were just starting to sense that something was off. I could feel the anticipation in the air, the knowledge that the truth was about to come to light. The time had come. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction. Tom was laughing and joking with our friends, as if everything was perfect. His laughter rang out, unaware that his life was on the verge of collapsing. Kate, on the other hand, kept glancing around the room, her eyes flitting nervously. She knew what was coming, and I knew she was dreading it. At the height of the evening, when everyone was deep in conversation and the mood was light, I made my move. I casually mentioned a conversation I'd had with Kate earlier in the week, one where we had talked about how much we'd connected emotionally. It was subtle at first, just a passing remark about how well we understood each other. But I made sure to drop in more details, letting the words hang in the air, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kate froze, her face drained of color, and her eyes widened with shock. I could see the realization hit her, the fact that I wasn't hiding anymore, that the game was up. The room fell silent as I continued, deliberately describing the affair, each word calculated to ensure everyone in the room heard it. I didn't even flinch as Tom's face turned red with rage. Tom had suspected something, but now it was undeniable. The look in his eyes, the rage building in him. It was almost like watching a man slowly lose everything. I could feel the satisfaction swell inside me as he put it all together. His world was coming apart, and it was all because of what had been brewing right under his nose. Then, the confrontation came. Tom snapped. How could you do this to me? Why? He roared, turning toward Kate. His voice cracked with disbelief, but it quickly turned to anger. He couldn't process it. He couldn't understand that this was all his fault, that he had failed to see what was happening in front of him. Kate tried to justify herself, but the words came out weak, lacking conviction. Tom, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Save it. Tom interrupted, his voice like thunder. You've already made your choice. You've made me a fool in front of everyone. I leaned back in my chair, watching the scene unfold, savoring every moment. I had waited so long for this. Tom was unraveling, his carefully constructed life falling apart in front of everyone. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted him to feel it, to feel the full weight of what he had neglected, of what he had lost. He had ignored his wife, and now he was paying the price. I turned to Tom, my voice calm, almost soothing. You didn't care enough to notice what was right in front of you. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to be ignored. The words cut through him like a knife. I watched as the anger in his eyes shifted to something else. Regret, disbelief, and finally, shame. His reputation, his business, everything he had worked for. It was all crumbling before him. Tom lashed out, but there was nothing left. It was too late. The damage had been done. The guests, who had been happily oblivious to the tension up until now, exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of what to say or do. The silence was thick with disbelief. Kate, on the other hand, was in a state of shock. She had tried to justify her actions, but nothing could fix what had just been revealed. Her gaze shifted between Tom and me, a mixture of fear and anger. She turned to me, expecting some kind of support, but I offered none. I didn't care about her now. She was just another casualty in the destruction I had orchestrated. John, the man who had been wronged, had become the one to deal the final blow. I had no remorse, no guilt. I had gotten exactly what I wanted. Tom's life was in ruins, and Kate, she was just as lost as he was. Her guilt had finally caught up to her, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. As the night ended in chaos, with Tom storming out, Kate standing in the middle of the room, crying, I stepped back. The satisfaction of seeing everything unfold, of watching the destruction I had caused, was almost overwhelming. But as I left that night, something shifted. There was a weight to the situation, an emptiness that gnawed at me. The wreckage I had created, was it worth it? I had exacted my revenge, I had destroyed everything, but in doing so, I had lost something too. Maybe it was the feeling of control, the illusion that all of this had meaning, but as I walked away from the wreckage of Tom's life, I couldn't help but wonder what would be left in the aftermath. The price of revenge had been high, and as I reflected on the broken relationships, the lives that would never be the same again, I realized that the real question wasn't whether I had won. It was whether anything would ever feel whole again after all this destruction. The dust had settled, but what would come next?